Hello, Debate High. Today, we will be talking about something that is extremely relevant to the 2020 NSDA national topic. The next couple of videos will be about the modern political economy. It's no secret that we live in a neoliberal capitalist society. In fact, capitalism, or some sort of market economy, has been pretty much the norm since the Industrial Revolution. In the past, capitalism has had multiple forms. They range from a free market, laissez-faire, globalized economy, where innovation and consumerism is not only encouraged, but expected, to a planned economy, where the state uses central planning to allocate resources, labor, and capital for a common society. Neither system is perfect, and both must be heavily scrutinized in order to advance our society and create a better economic system. Since the resolution is asking us to interpret the effects of a political economy which allows the creation of dynastic wealth, in this case, a neoliberal capitalist society, which is the status quo, I thought it would be appropriate to take a look at neoliberal capitalism, but with a critical lens. The academic community has all but universally agreed that neoliberalism is a terrible form of economics. It's a structure that favors the rich and allows exploitation of the working class. It's backwards and flawed. This series of videos will analyze the harmful effects of predatory capitalism and why it must be replaced as soon as possible with an ethical, democratized form of capitalism. Part 1. Predatory capitalism is exploitative and environmentally unstable. In a neoliberal political economy, a corporation has one purpose: to make its shareholders money. Following this logic, companies for hundreds of years have mastered the art of cutting corners. In a capitalist economy, a system of wage labor is created. To grossly oversimplify, wage labor can be described as an employer who pays an employee an X amount of currency in exchange for their labor, more specifically, what their labor creates, i.e., goods and services, transformation of raw materials into a commercially viable product. In theory, wage labor can be beneficial to all parties, as long as the employer compensates the employee with a fair and proportional wage. However, the central problem in a predatory capitalist society is that employers are not paying a fair wage. In fact, worker compensation is extremely low when compared to the value of what a worker produces. This discrepancy directly results in the exploitation of a worker. Because a corporation only seeks to make a profit, it will disregard workers' rights at any available opportunity. Much more importantly, workers are seen as tools whose only purpose is to solely make money for the company. This robs the workers of their humanity and individuality and makes them exploitation much more feasible. Now, predatory capitalism has created a society where refusal to work for a wage is a sentence for starvation and a direct route to abject poverty. Moreover, workers who decide to settle for less than stellar compensation are treated as tools with no real power in the company. They are seen as disposable. In the past, workers' unions have seen as a possible solution for worker representation. Through collective bargaining, workers retook some of the power they had previously lost. However, automation, lobbying, and outsourcing have once again weakened the power of workers in the political economy. Due to neoliberal politics, a person's labor is once again disposable and easily replaceable through outsourcing and automation. This often leads to worse working conditions and less compensation. We can obviously conclude that a predatory capitalist system is incredibly unethical, unfair, and greedy. The original sin of our modern political economy is the lack of humanity towards workers, seeing them as mere tools to which the shareholders and, to much larger extent, the company can profit. Its most recent incarnation is that indoctrination that the free market can't fix any problem, and that the utter lie is that an economy performs best when it's left alone. This has been proven time and time again to not be the case. There are many scholarly articles that attest to this fact. We can look no further than to Chapter 5 of the book Knowledge in the Digital Age of Capitalism, An Introduction to Cognitive Materialism. In it, Dr. Mariano Zuckerfield eloquently summarizes how exploitation is deeply integrated in modern capitalism. The following are excerpts from his work. Chapter 5 is called Exploitation in the Foundation of Accumulation of Capital. Capitalist exploitation is evidently the central core of capitalist dynamic, the accumulation of capital, the historical development of capitalism. However, conceptually, capitalist exploitation is merely a particular form of exploitation. Indeed, almost any generic definition of exploitation is applicable to the relationship between slaves and masters, and between serfs and lords in the Middle Ages. In Chapter 5 of the book Knowledge in the Digital Age of Capitalism, An Introduction to Cognitive Materialism, Dr. Mariano Zuckerfield eloquently summarizes how exploitation is deeply integrated in modern capitalism. The following are excerpts from his work. Capitalist exploitation is, evidently, the central core of the capitalist dynamic, the accumulation of capital, the historical development of capitalism. However, conceptually, capitalist exploitation is merely a particular form of exploitation. Indeed, almost any generic definition of exploitation is applicable to the relationship between slaves and masters in antiquity, or between serfs and lords in the Middle Ages. Furthermore, exploitation, even within the capitalist system, also occurs outside of capitalist productive processes. Capitalist exploitation is the essence of the accumulation of capital. In this sense, the idea that capitalist exploitation, and, more generically, the accumulation of capital, rely on processes extrinsic to it. This emerges for the first time with the concept of primitive accumulation. It was necessary to strip the peasants both of their lands and of their feudal ties in order to force them to seek out a subsistence from employment in the capitalist productive processes. Even in this extreme summary, it can be observed that the idea of primitive accumulation combines two distinguishable elements that have been present from the outset of capitalism. On one hand, the sanction of laws, especially those which demarcated private property, for example, the Enclosure Acts, but also those related to exclusive access to a subject's own body, market norms, etc. On the other hand, the effective appropriation by various actors of lands, precious materials, and other riches. The fact that exploited workers cannot absorb the totality of the commodities produced by capital leads to cyclical crises of capitalist overproduction. This obliges capitalism to expand into unknown regions, to export its markets, property, and doubly free labor to regions lacking agreed norms so that in them surplus value can be realized. Exploitation refers to the asymmetrical exchanges that occur within productive processes, exchanges that mean one of the parties, the exploiter, obtains a greater economic value than the other, and it's obtained at the latter's cost. As we just saw, the idea of exploiting others for your own gain is not new to the current manifestation of capitalism. As we're about to see, the indoctrination of the belief that hard work and pure grit is all it takes to succeed is just no longer viable in a world that consistently shifts the reality of what it means to be successful. Now, your connections and social capital is arguably more important than your sheer willpower. In the US, it's almost universally agreed that anyone can achieve the American dream. They just have to work hard and just follow the meritocracy. The assumption that a little bit of elbow grease can propel you up the socioeconomic ladder might be true for some, especially for those who have some sort of generational wealth or social advantages. But it's not always true for others. In reality, the United States is a clear example of how predatory capitalism has successfully persuaded the public into believing that hard work, or more accurately, exploitation, is normal and even good for them. Umair Haq, a London-based consultant and economic author, published a work on popular news website Medium, appropriately titled How Capitalism Taught Americans Exploitation Was Good for Them. This piece sums up how American culture incentivizes and endorses capitalist exploitation under the guise of social economic progress. The following are excerpts of his work. The article titled, How Capitalism Taught Americans Exploitation Was Good for Them. It says that Americans aren't paid what they're worth. Their incomes have flatlined for half a century, but their productivity, which is roughly the profit that they earn for capitalists, has skyrocketed. American economists call it the productivity wage gap. It simply is called exploitation. Exploitation in America seems to have become a way of life. 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, 70% can't raise $1,000 for an emergency, kids perform active shooter drills, abuse is rifled in industry after industry, sick people crowdfund basic medicines, really sick people have to choose between chemotherapy and paying their mortgage, students pay higher interest rates than hedge funds, the very ones who looted their parents' mortgages and savings. Exploitation isn't the exception in America, it's the rule. Americans came to believe in the hope that by working long and hard hours and by exploiting themselves and everyone else, maybe all the riches capitalists seem to have amassed would rain down on them too. Perhaps it would trickle down. Precisely the opposite seemed to have happened. A zero-sum game is being played, and so American life never seems to really go anywhere but plunge downwards, shrinking middle class, vanishing savings, and failing longevity. Exploitation is trickling down so wealth can trickle up. Predatory capitalism made work largely the execution and perfection of exploitation. Instead of labor being an expression of human possibility, it became the predation upon human vulnerability. The price of survival is therefore exploitation. The average American can only now survive through exploitation. He is being exploited at this very same time. Americans are trapped by the pincers of capitalism. The average American is poorer than his grandparents, not richer, broke, impoverished, and desperate. He or she lives right at the edge of ruin. Every single day, one perpetual misstep, one illness, one unpaid bill, or emergency away from disaster, which means true ruin, homelessness, bankruptcy, healthcare that no one can afford, and so on. Abuse that has been culturally normalized in America because exploitation is an act of survival, when you must exploit yourself and everyone else around you simply to earn your daily bread. Nobody is receiving a fair share of the work they do. Soon enough, a culture and a society becomes a predatory one. Now that we discussed the exploitation that occurs in a predatory capitalist society, I think it would be appropriate to address the environmental issues in said system. A highly industrialized and globalized economy logically produces more goods. The biggest issue that must be addressed is the false belief that the economy will grow infinitely when we live in a world with finite resources. What this essentially means is that the global economy will keep producing at the expense of the environment and society. Since much of the negative effects will not be revealed in many of the current capitalists' lifetime, it has become easy for them to dismiss the incoming ecological meltdown that is set to take place due to the overproduction and misappropriation of resources. Not to mention the existence of a multi-trillion-dollar fossil fuel industry whose main products directly pollute the atmosphere. There is an overwhelming scientific consensus, not to mention overwhelming scientific literature, that attests to the detrimental effect of the global economy on the environment. In this paper, we will discuss the work of Peter Ness, a professor of planning and urban regions at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. He is the author of the article Unsustainable Growth, Unsustainable Capitalism. In this article, he discusses the fundamental contradiction between a completely profit-oriented economic model, such as modern-day predatory capitalism, and environmental stability. The following is the abstract of the paper, Unsustainable Growth, Unsustainable Capitalism. This article argues that there is a fundamental contradiction between a profit-oriented economic system and long-term environmental sustainability. The solutions are proposed by mainstream environmental economists as well as their ecological economy colleagues do not solve the central problems, but serve to further highlight the difficulties of changing capitalism towards sustainability. In a profit-oriented economy, capital accumulation is a prime driving force, and non-growth for the economy at large tends to result in serious economic and social crisis. On the other hand, a decoupling of economic growth from resource depletion and environmental degradation is possible only within certain sectors of product types and within relatively short time perspectives. The assumptions of mainstream economists about infinite economic growth and infinite dematerialization represent a false ontology according to which the powers and mechanisms of the natural world are considered totally controllable by humans, as if they were the epiphenomena of the human world. On the other hand, the assumptions of certain ecological economists about the possibility of steady-state capitalism disregard the relation between capital and surplus value, which constitutes a strong mechanism driving the capitalist economy towards limitless growth. As Ness describes, our current political economy is environmentally unstable. We as a society must do something to fix our economy and stop the explicit abuse that is all too common both in the environment and among wage laborers. We have reached the end of the first part of this mini-series. The next video, we will discuss how predatory capitalism creates inequality and is anti-democratic. Of course, we as debaters and as citizens must always think critically of everything. I give full credit to all the work of the authors whose work has been featured here today. I highly encourage you to check out their full articles. As always, the bibliography will be available to you on the Debate High's website. Of course, be safe, do not stop learning, and thank you so much for watching Debate High. We will catch you in the next one.